If you're a sports fan, then you've probably heard of apps like DraftKings, FanDuel, and Caesars Sportsbook. Despite being fairly new, these mobile betting platforms have already gained a massive customer base. In fact, it wasn't until 2018 that the Supreme Court allowed states to legalize this form of betting. Since then, 36 states and the District of Columbia have chosen to allow it, with more likely to follow. It's no secret that sports betting has turned into big business. Last month's Super Bowl game raked in a record number of online wagers. According to CNBC, there were over 100 million transactions that day, up 25% from last year's showdown. And if that wasn't enough, several of the online sportsbooks aired commercials during the event. While these ads lured in customers of all ages, they've been particularly successful with one specific demographic: young people. Zoom in on New Jersey, for example, which has the largest sports betting market in the country. In 2020, the state earned close to $50 million in tax revenue from the sector. Almost 95% of transactions occurred through mobile betting, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures.
In New Jersey, what we see is the biggest increases in people from year to year who are wagering on sports are in the youngest demographic. So a whole generation of people who, if you look at online casino gambling, that's people in their 40s is the average age.
That's Leah Nauer, a professor and the director of the Center for Gambling Studies at Rutgers University. Nauer says that since mobile sports betting is fairly new, there's not enough data to support its connection to an uptick in gambling addiction. However, what is clear is that these apps make wagering easier and more precarious for those who already have a problem. Instead of driving to a casino or remote sportsbook to place a bet, these sites let users gamble from a living room sofa. Even worse, Nauer notes that online sports bettors have a higher risk of problem gambling and mental health problems compared to other gamblers. Despite these warnings, many universities have partnered with betting apps, allowing them to advertise at collegiate stadiums and public places across campus.
I think they should not be legal because 3/4 of the undergraduate population is arguably underage in most states.
Although apps do check a person's age, these systems are not exactly foolproof. Before making an account, most states require users to upload a picture of a driver's license. Some experts warn that underage teens with fake IDs can easily pass this step. Some states don't even require photo ID verification. Apps simply ask the visitor to input the year they were born and credit card information. Even for kids who aren't so savvy, it's all too easy to gain access. That was exactly the case for Dr. Timothy Fong, a clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of California, Los Angeles, and the co-director of the UCLA Gambling Studies program. His teenage son was able to get onto a sports betting app after Fong downloaded it for research purposes.
I opened the account to get a sense of what it's like. I downloaded some money into that account and started playing some of their offerings. Well, a few days later, our 17-year-old son said, "Dad, hey, I noticed you had some of these bets going, and I'm just curious, like, what are you doing?" And when I realized that his phone is using the exact same Apple ID as my phone, and so downloaded automatically onto his phone where the exact apps were on my phone. So through no fault of his own, he was able to enter in to a gambling app under the age of 21. And if he had wanted to, he could have placed bets really without my knowledge. So it's an example there where something happened where he shouldn't have been allowed to get to that gambling operator, but technology and their oversights failed, and he was able to.
Fong adds that with all the promotion geared towards young people, he can see why teenagers like his son are curious about sports betting. But with developing brains being the most vulnerable to addiction, an interest in gambling could quickly spiral out of control. Because of this, Fong believes that advertisement restrictions, similar to the ones in place for alcohol and tobacco, should also apply to mobile sports betting.
We have a lot of rules on advertising toward tobacco and alcohol and cannabis toward young people. Like you can't have a billboard, advertising alcohol near a school and that sort of thing. Well, I don't see us as a state here in California or in many other states being as effective at doing that for gambling. So again, when you can have just immense amount of gambling advertising on broadcast television, immense amount of gambling advertising on social media, these aren't being really looked at to say, well, wait a minute, these are violations of our gambling advertising or our gambling rules.
Aside from advertising, Nauer adds that the government must crack down on the apps themselves. Sports betting apps are allowed to collect data from users, like how much money they spend, time spent on the app, and the frequency of bets. In the UK, this data is monitored so employees can intervene if there's excessive use.
They require operators to conduct affordability checks on people who are gambling on their site. And they fine operators who are allowing people who obviously don't have the money to wager what they're wagering for permitting them to continue further indebt themselves.
States that have legalized sports betting make several millions per year from the taxes on winnings. With this additional revenue, Nauer recommends that the U.S. follow in the UK's footsteps and create a national regulatory body on gambling. Not only could a commission like this force apps to intervene, but it would also investigate potentially harmful partnerships, like those between universities and betting companies. Another key focus would be to spread awareness about the dangers of gambling, whether it be in person or online betting.
I think most people in the general public would say, well, yeah, we know gambling's addictive and we know there's a potential for that, but I don't think people realize how potentially addictive it can be, particularly for young people, how it only takes a few months to develop the unhealthy patterns of gambling addiction. This isn't something that takes, 10, 15 years. It can happen, fairly quickly. So when I think about what we need to do, we need to protect the young people from developing that. We need to protect people who are already vulnerable to addiction. So these are people with active addiction or active mental health problems from engaging in an unhealthy way of using gambling as a way of feeling better.
In an era where you can gamble straight from your phone, experts warn about the increasing acceptance and casual attitude towards sports betting. It's now normal to bet hundreds or even thousands of dollars on a single football game. Other than it being an unwise financial decision, betting at this level creates an unhealthy culture around sports betting and gambling in general.
I'll put it even more simply, where I think about where is this headed, is that we now are embracing gambling as an activity, just like drinking coffee or ordering DoorDash or even using cannabis. So what are the implications in the next 5 or 10 years? I think that's where the interesting questions are, because gambling is a public health issue.
If you or someone you know is struggling with a gambling addiction, reach out to the National Problem Gambling Helpline at 1-800-522-4700. The line is open 24 hours a day, and anonymous calls are accepted. To find out more about Leah Nauer, Timothy Fong, and all of our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galanti. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson. This segment is brought to you by Capital One. You don't need special gadgets to be a hero. With unlimited 1.5% cash back on every purchase, everywhere, the Capital One Quicksilver Card makes you the hero of every purchase. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details. Coming up next week.
And then there are times where we need to speak up and say, hey, it's time for me to go to bed. I have things to do tomorrow. I'm going to leave.
The importance of setting boundaries in relationships. Then,
neglected, abused, unwanted. Sometimes families, their homes break up for divorce.
Understanding the many reasons why pets end up at shelters. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.